Welcome to a special edition of Legal AF, where we are privileged to have Judge Michael Luttig back with us. There's been so much that's happened, Judge, since the last time we got together. And I'll just kind of put it up on the roster, and we'll do some speed chess here and go through some of these and get your opinions and your inside knowledge and inside opinions about each of these things or about these things. We got one. Of course, we've got the 165-page brief that was required effectively to be filed because of Chief Justice Roberts. They're solving for a problem created by Chief Justice Roberts in the immunity decision because he required Judge Chutkan, to do a fact-based analysis, fact-bound analysis, and how else do you do that, including facts and context around facts, unless you give the opportunity to the special counsel to provide all of the supporting evidence in order to categorize these things into the three immunity buckets: absolute immunity, presumption of immunity, and no immunity. And he did exactly that. He's got another 300 pages plus coming in about 10 days into the public record of evidence. And there were a number of things that were very interesting in there. I want to get your perspective on it. Then, of course, we've got another leak from this United States Supreme Court. It's a very leaky court. Like, I don't really recall any other court that's had this many issues with draft opinions and inside baseball chamber discussions, and now a memo to the New York Times in which it was clear from Chief Justice Roberts, as the author, that he was, from my perspective, he was driving the train on all three decisions to benefit Donald Trump. Had some very caustic, sharp things to say about the D.C. Court of Appeals, about the immunity decision, and a decision that he seemed to have made about Justice Alito right around the time of the flag, upside down flag controversy, to take him not have him sidelined from the decision making or the caucusing around an opinion, but to just leave him off, not have him author one of the opinions. And of course, that has led to a new round of ethical dilemmas and investigations into that particular thing. And then, since we last, right where this time we started speaking, you helped found an organization which I want to hear more about, and some things that happened in the Sunday New York Times Magazine, the Rule of Law Society. We want to hear more about that, and particularly in the Sunday Magazine article, which had the scary cover of a bullseye or a archery bullseye, and the potential targets of Donald Trump if he were to return to office, as he then weaponized and destroyed the independence of the Department of Justice and FBI, and then used it to investigate and ultimately prosecute his political enemies. And the list there was quite extensive, and you're quoted in that article, and I think our audience would love to hear you speak directly to that. So having now set the agenda, I'll open the floor to Judge Luttig to pick up with whichever of those you'd like to, and I'll chime in.
Well, thank you, Michael. As always, it's an honor to be on with you and the MeidasTouch Network. I think I would begin to parse through the several questions that you impliedly pose this way. I do not think that the Supreme Court of the United States will soon, if ever, regain the lost trust of the American people. This has been, let's say, 3 or 4 years running now, where the court has suffered the lowest trust in the history of the polls gauging the American people's trust in the Supreme Court. And I think probably today it's at the lowest point in the history of the court. Much of that is self-inflicted, as I've said, due to the various ethical revelations that have surfaced over the past couple of years. But frankly, the court's decisions in both the 14th Amendment, Section 3 disqualification case, and then in the Trump versus United States, the immunity case, um, have added exponentially to those self-inflicted wounds, if you want to call them that, from which I think the court will be very very long in recovering from, Michael. It's a tragic time in the court's history. On the other hand, um, you know, the court has made these decisions knowingly, open-eyed, and in the ethics area, for instance, has essentially told the American people, we, the Supreme Court, you know, we don't need to be bound by ethical standards like all other federal judges, and we're not going to be. Then, if you segue over to the two cases I just referenced, we'll discuss them in greater length. But both of them, but especially the immunity case, was, as I've said from the first day, an abominable decisions of constitutional law. And when I say decisions of constitutional law, what I mean is that they were paraded as decisions of constitutional law, but neither one of them was grounded in either the Constitution or the laws of the United States at all. In particular, the immunity case, the Supreme Court, in the vernacular of lawyers, just made it up out of whole cloth, Michael. And not only did they make it up, but their decision was contrary to every single precedent on presidential authority since the founding of the nation almost 250 years ago. And not only was it contrary to all those precedents, it was unsupported by any provision in the Constitution or law of the United States. It was that I have said, and I believe this even more today than when I first said it, if the framers of our Constitution had ever thought that the Supreme Court of the United States would decide Trump against the United States in the way that it did, affording the President of the United States absolute immunity from prosecution for, almost any crime that he or she commits against the United States of America, I believe that literally the framers of the Constitution would have either provided differently for the Supreme Court of the United States or provided differently for the executive, that is the president, in the Constitution of the United States, so as to ensure that no president of the United States, least of all the president of the United States, no president would be above the law, which is what this Supreme Court held.
So this Supreme Court letting this president, in particular Donald Trump and other future presidents, levitate above the Constitution. Is it your view, Judge, that as written, as framed by the framers of the Constitution, by the founding fathers and the framers, that they believed they didn't have to put in for avoidance of doubt language, that the way that they delicately balanced the document and the various main article powers for the presidency, the legislative branch, and the judiciary, that the reason when they put their pen down and published it, they didn't believe we'd ever have what happened in 2023 and 2024 would happen, because they believed that the language in there, properly read and interpreted, would have avoided exactly what the United States Supreme Court just did. It's not like they forgot. and left out for like what we do in the law, what you and I do as lawyers. Sometimes we put in for avoidance of doubt. We do not mean for the presidency to levitate above the co-equal branches of government. But they didn't feel they needed to do that, did they?
Well, that's correct, Michael, and they didn't. But it's even more than that. Uh, America fought the Revolutionary War in order to gain its independence from the British Crown and the monarchy, and establish a country under the rule of law, rather than, as we say, the rule of man. And so the entire premise of the Constitution of the United States is that no man is above the law, but, Michael, more importantly and more relevantly to our discussion today, the entire premise of the Constitution of the United States is that the President of the United States, America's new monarch, if you will, would never be above the law. Yeah. And so it is beyond astonishing that the Supreme Court reached the decision it did. And by the way, there's not a question in the world that the Supreme Court held as it did solely to prevent Donald Trump from being prosecuted for his grave offenses against the United States on January 6th. How do we know that? Among other things, and I will talk about this the rest of my days. For almost 250 years since the founding and since the Constitution, the federal courts, and in particular the Supreme Court of the United States, decides only the narrow question presented to the court for decision. That question, in this case, was whether Donald Trump, not any president, Donald Trump, whether Donald Trump could be prosecuted on the charges brought by Jack Smith for attempting to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Now, as I said, those offenses are perhaps the gravest offenses that a president can commit against the United States. That is, trying to remain in power, to remain in the presidency of the United States against the will and the vote of the American people. That's as grave an offense as possible under the Constitution, with the possible exception of treason, but only possible exception. Now, the Supreme Court decided, Michael, every other possible case challenging the prosecution of any president except this case, which it was asked to decide. And of course, you know, your listeners have seen much of the opinion already or heard about it. And, you know, the Supreme Court was, you know, protested too much, not only at the argument, but then in the opinion, that it was deciding this case not on the merits of this case alone, but for all the ages. So the Supreme Court itself told the American people that it decided, you know, the issue of when a president can be prosecuted for a crime against the United States in every possible context. But as I said, except the one context in which the case arose. That is to say, the Supreme Court did not tell us whether Donald Trump could be prosecuted for the offenses with which he's been charged by Jack Smith.
Yeah.
that turned the judicial process, the judicial decision-making process on its head. If you extrapolate out, Michael, and if all courts, but especially the Supreme Court, did that in every case, instead of never except in this one case, the Supreme Court of the United States would not even would cease to function, because no one would have an ounce of respect for the court, and that's the consequence from these decisions. The American public, they're not stupid, but the Supreme Court, took them for stupid, said what it did, and the American people are going, "What are you talking about? You held that the President of the United States, the one person that the Constitution says is never above the law, he or she is immune from prosecution? And by the way, you said this particular president, who has committed the gravest crimes possible under the Constitution, he too is immune from prosecution? What on earth are you doing?"
Yeah, your point is so well taken, Judge. I mean, that would be to say that the framers and the founding fathers were trading one despot monarch for another, and had left England in order to create their own. I mean, as you said, not I mean, of all the things they got wrong, to get the fundamental uh, flame that lit the fuse that started our revolution and our separation from England. That's the thing they got wrong. And as you said, and above the law, it's just mind-boggling. Well, this is why I'll say it. You don't have to. This is why, John Roberts is circling the drain of history for me as a Chief Justice. Now you have that as a backdrop to, the New York Times article that you were quoted in. How fearful should our audience be that Donald Trump, if he ever were to get anywhere near the White House again, is going to destroy, under whether you call it the unitary president theory or just Donald Trump's a megalomaniacal person, is going to destroy the independence of the Department of Justice and the FBI, and is going to actually go after people that he has said in public that he will go after: donors, lawyers, election workers, judges, FBI people, people that have testified against him, members of the media who he wants to jail, who are enemies of the people, and all of that. It was a scary Sunday morning coffee read for me. Of course, I've been following it for a long, long time. What's your view of it? And if he's going to try it, what are the remaining guardrails around it in our system that he hasn't destabilized, that have legitimacy, that can prevent, and I'm just going to say it out loud, Trump internment camps from being set up all over America the way the Japanese Americans were interned during World War II. Japanese Americans, not Japanese, during World War II.
There's every reason in the world, Michael, to believe that Donald Trump will do exactly what he has said he will do. He has done that every time that he has said something for the past 8 years. And he obviously feels very, very strongly about this retaliation or revenge against any and everyone who's crossed him in any way whatsoever. And the Supreme Court of the United States has essentially written him a blank check to do much, if not all, that he has threatened to do if he's elected president again. Another way to say that, picking up on one other thread of your question, is that there are few, if any, guardrails left now for a Donald Trump second term, which is to say, and I think you've heard me say this before, I am not one who believes that that the guardrails held and have held since January 6, 2021. maybe in the technical sense, the guardrails themselves held, but the officials who administer those guardrails, they failed. Donald Trump won, and now he has won the right in the Supreme Court of the United States to continue dismantling the federal government and our democracy in the way that he's done up to now and said he will do if elected president again.
All right. So on that note, besides motivating people, and I'll congratulate you because you did open the floodgates for senior Republican officials in multiple Republican administrations, from White House lawyers to national defense and intelligence community members to constitutional scholars who never voted for a Democrat before. It was only after your letter from 2 months ago, your very full-throated endorsement, not just of Kamala Harris, but as the Democratic Party being the only party that can protect the rule of law in our constitutional republic. And then after that, once you had the courage to do that, then the next 10 group, the 100, the 200, the 300, the Republicans for Kamala, that type of thing. But I want to make it clear to people in our audience, it's not that people and leaders like you, patriots like you fell in love with Kamala and like, oh, I'm just going to vote for Kamala. I like her policies better. It goes much deeper than that. It's that you believe that we have no choice in order, as you said, to preserve any semblance of this great democracy and constitutional republic that we built, or we're in danger of answering in the negative Ben Franklin's comment coming out of the streets when somebody asked, what kind of government, what kind of country do we have? You have a constitutional republic if you can keep it. I mean, the way you've just described it, Trump gets in again, another 4 years with his agenda, we're going to lose it.
That's my view, Michael. A president's there is nothing more important than a president's sacred obligations to preserve and protect American democracy, the Constitution of the United States, and the rule of law. Donald Trump, certainly over the past 4 years, beginning with January 6, 2021, if not before, has time and time again demonstrated his utter disdain for those sacred obligations of a president of the United States. And that's the reason that I endorsed Kamala Harris. And at this point, Michael, I have voted for Kamala Harris. But it's, I have never said that I would vote for her or, because she was the only choice. My vote is more enthusiastic, if you will, than that. It's not a negative vote against Donald Trump, though it is that, to be sure. But I know to a certainty that of the two major party candidates, the vice president is the only choice for America, for the reasons that all of us really know. And I don't have much patience anymore for the Republican cop-out that, well, her policies are more liberal than Donald Trump's. As far as I'm concerned, Michael, if you care about America ahead of your political party and yourself, then you have no choice but to vote for Kamala Harris.
Well, that's why when Mitt Romney, who's pushing 80, who's not going to run for office again, when he said, "I just can't bring myself to vote for Kamala Harris. I don't want to lose my voice within the Republican Party, to help rebuild it after post Trump." I'm like, "Are you kidding me? If you listen to Michael Luttig, there may not be a country left to rebuild if you give Donald Trump 4 more years."
These are intensely personal decisions, and you've heard me talk about them in that way. But this decision on November 5th is not about politics, Michael. It's first, it's about country. It's about America. It's about the United States of America. But second, Michael, it is about who we are individually and then who we are as a nation. It's intensely personal. And I don't believe that there's a very many Republican officials who are even who would dare think of it that way for fear that they would feel guilty for not making the right choice for their country. It's just much easier to gloss over it and give the back of the hand to the fact that Kamala Harris is more liberal than they are, and her policies will be more liberal, and to completely forget and ignore all that Donald Trump has done on and since January 6, 2021, as if it never happened at all, Michael. That's what these Republicans are doing. And as you've heard me say, they're cowards, whether they're political cowards, moral cowards, or both. They're cowards.
Yeah. And we're so honored and so privileged to have you not just on the Midas Touch Network, but you helping to defend democracy. And I mean, you could have just done what you thought was your patriotic duty as a scholar and as a defender of the Constitution, and guided Mike Pence the way you did to ensure that we did not accidentally topple our democracy, as J.B. Raskin once said. And that would have been enough. I mean, for me, that gets you in the Hall of Fame. And yet, after that, you've really come out as one of the strong voices that are resonating with the American people, that are needed at this particular moment. I mean, it reminds me. I'm thinking about the revolution and the revolutionary times when I meet with you a lot and I interview with you a lot. You're like Paul Revere, just running on your horse, telling people, the British are coming, but in this case, the enemy is within, and which is such an important thing, and for you to do at this point in your career, and help found the Rule of Law Society, which I just love every part about that and what I've read about that, and always again that you found your way to Midas Touch, and that you are willing to spend time with an audience that you wouldn't normally reach on, let's say, on corporate media, but is here. And as many as you probably have learned already, many Americans, I think the vast majority of Americans, are not getting their news and their information and their education, if you will, from mainstream media or from corporate media. They're getting it. They've not only cut the cable, they've cut that as a feeder source, and so many people are getting it from YouTube. And that's all channeled to them, the information that they want, and now you're able to reach that audience. We were going to talk about, as much as you can, about, because it's come up again in the Jack Smith filing, about your role to protect democracy from toppling over. And I know there's things you won't be able to completely talk about there, but I'd love to save that for a whole nother interview at some point, maybe even before the election. Would you be willing to do that with us again?
Absolutely, Michael. I'd be honored to come on with you and Midas Touch anytime. Let me just say, before we leave, that November 5th is a test of Americans' commitment to America's democracy, the Constitution, and rule of law. And, I have full faith and confidence in the American people, and I will until I have reason otherwise. Uh, I believe that on November 5th, um, Vice President Kamala Harris will be elected the next president of the United States. I believe that when voters go in to that voting booth and draw the curtain, um, they will be unable to pull the lever for Donald Trump again if they ever have before.
Yeah, you could not have put it any more succinctly. I agree with you. When they get behind that electronic curtain and pull that switch, and I think she is being underpolled in terms of polling. I know they're always so worried because the pollsters always get it wrong the last several elections, and they in the past they'd underpolled Trump by 1.5 or 2%, but I think they're underpolling Kamala Harris and the power of women and men and others that support women. For me alone, just to restore reproductive rights and restore women to first class citizenship in this country, um, that alone would be enough for me to vote against Donald Trump and for Kamala Harris. And what I've seen as the destruction of one of the three branches of government by the MAGA right takeover, or at least Roberts's acquiescence to it, and to restore that to a proper balance. And the only way to do that, if we get the historical couple of openings, natural causes or otherwise, in the next term, think of the that alone for me would get me to vote. If Donald Trump gets back in and he gets two more votes, and let's say maybe there's a retirement and one more, it's 7-2. And it's 7-2 for a long time. A lot of these people are in their 50s. That means two generations from now we'll be dealing with this. If Kamala Harris gets it, it could go back to 5-4 with the center lefts in control. And I think we're in a better place in that regard, especially to undo a lot of the damage that's been done by the Roberts Court if that were to happen. But that's you and me. The problem, not for our audience, because they're here for it. They're here for the intersection of law and politics. They understand the importance. Supreme Court may do 75 decisions during a year, and only 5 or 2 are going to impact their world, but they will rock their world. It's like a crevice risk. We will fall to oblivion because of 1 or 2 of these particular decisions. And now people are waking up and saying the Supreme Court does matter to me. I mean, for them, when Hillary ran, it was like, well, I don't like Hillary. Well, you're going to lose the Supreme Court for a long, long time, and you may not like the results of that. Yep, but I don't like her. And now I think, as you said, we have to get away from this, personal, oh, I don't want to have a beer with that candidate, and look at the fundamentals of how to protect that which our framers and founders gave us. And that's where we're at now. That's why it's so existential.
Well, I think that for all the reasons that you mentioned and the many others that you and I are aware of, uh, I don't understand how a woman could ever vote for Donald Trump. That is beyond me.
Me too.
Uh,
I
I
see
have
them in the
now
rallies.
applied that to the situation that's very common in our country where Donald Trump has attacked people and their families. And those same people will vote for him on November 5th. You know, I, that really brings me to the point that I made at the time that I endorsed the vice president on the first day of the Democratic convention. And that is that from the beginning, we are all taught right from wrong. We are not taught right from left. And this election coming up in a few weeks is about right and wrong. It is emphatically not about right and left. And Donald Trump and the Republican Party want to make it about right and left. And to do so is to ignore entirely January 6, 2021, and all that Donald Trump has done in the intervening 3.5 years to delegitimize our America's institutions of law and democracy and law enforcement. And of course, it's easy to understand that he and the Republican Party would want, but the rest of America, they see through that, Michael. This is not rocket science, and it's the decision here is about right and wrong, and there's a right candidate and there's a wrong candidate. That's what this is all about.
Yeah. On that note, when our 20 minutes stretches to 40 minutes, we are better for it. Judge Michael Luttig on the MeidasTouch Network and Legal AF again. Always a pleasure. Can't think of a better person at this critical time in our country to bring to the American people and the American voter that's watching the importance of voting on November 5th and for which party in order to keep our democracy, stable and not being brought low by somebody like Donald Trump. Judge Luttig, thank you. We'll see you very soon, hopefully before the election.
Thank you, Michael. I certainly appreciate it.
In collaboration with the MeidasTouch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.